Welcome to the Every Night is Game Night preview series, the show where designers and publishers share their passion and answer critical questions about their Kickstarter projects. If you're on the fence about a pledge, this is the show for you.
ENGN Preview Series, Episode 46, Adventure Tactics, Domianne's Tower, with Nicholas Yu and Dan Letzring. Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome back to the Every Night is Game Night Preview Series. We're back from the dead. We haven't done one of these preview series in a long time, but we had to resurrect this one because a good friend contacted me. Whenever a good friend contacts me, it's just, I got to do it. I got to whip out the microphone again and resurrect the preview series, have a little bit of fun talking about a really fun project. So the project that we're talking about today is Adventure Tactics, Domianne's Tower. Am I pronouncing that right? Domianne's Tower?
Yeah, got it one.
Yes! I didn't even confirm that the first time.
Nailed it.
Adventure Tactics, Domianne's Tower. We have the publisher and the designer are both joining me. This is my first podcast from my new basement, actually. Woohoo, I finished moving. But before I'm going on and on. So the person that reached out to me, he has been on the show a couple of times, advertising project. This is by far the biggest project that his company has engaged in. The company is Letzring Games. This is Dan Letzring. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much, Jason, for having me back here. It's always so good to talk to you.
All right. And you have brought along a friend, the designer of Adventure Tactics. He has also a couple of games to his credit, and I'm going to ask him to introduce his background in a little bit. But he is Nicholas Yu. Welcome to the show for the first time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. And
this is not your maiden voyage design. What else have you designed?
Hero Brigade and Eternal Dynasty were my first two games. And those came out a few years ago, like 5-6 years ago. Like, as Dan likes to say, that was the Ice Age. But I mean, that was a long time ago in terms of like Kickstarter, board game world. Like, so much has changed in the last 5-6 years. But I took a break because I have young kids. I have 3 kids, 5 and under. So I did the last couple of years too. And twins, yeah, 2 of those 3 are twins. So
good Lord.
Yeah, it's a hectic household. So. But apparently the ideas were still germinating in my head. So when Dan approached me with the idea of collaborating on a game, we just got to it.
And those 2 other games are, I guess, on the smaller variety compared to what this is. This is a big honking adventure, right?
Yeah, Eternal Dynasty, I would say, was like a kind of like a mid-sized game. It was a territory control game, also with cards because I love cards. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, Adventure Tactics is like kind of unfathomably huge with like minis, 800 cards, all the game boards and pieces and standees and everything. It's pretty nuts.
So we're gonna just jump right into it because we were talking about this before the call, and This is a big adventure game, right? Kickstarter is awash in big adventure games. I mean, we could do a preview every week of a big adventure game. Like, as we were recording, Etherfield is on there, and it's already like smashed a Spunding goal. Awaken Realms kind of earned that reputation. Madara has, kind of, I think it's just wrapping up. Either it's end or just finished. There's so many different projects. How do you differentiate? What is distinct about Adventure Tactics Domianne's Tower that differentiates it from all of these other big projects?
I'll go. We can both go.
Yeah, you go first. Yeah.
We've talked about this a few times, but because what happens, there are a lot, as you mentioned, there's a lot of great adventure games that do similar things like a campaign guide and tactical battling. But one thing we haven't seen yet is someone really trying to replicate or emulate the job system from Final Fantasy Tactics, where you have 20 classes, and it's not, you pick one and go, but you can mix and match. You start with one, you level up another, that unlocks a third one or a fourth one, and then you just, shuffle back and forth between those, and you pick up the best abilities from each one, and you make like your perfect, your favorite custom character.
So
I just haven't seen that.
So this is Final Fantasy Tactics, the board game, like just full stop.
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely that's the number one game that we talked about, like our favorite video game of all time. That's what we wanted to emulate. Like we hadn't seen a robust class system like that.
Yeah, I would say there are some differences between the game and Final Fantasy Tactics, but where we stray closest to it is the class system.
Right.
Okay. All right, so we could just jump right in. So there's two ends. Or actually, I should say like three pillars of a good adventure game. There is the hero system, there's the combat system and the enemies and all that kind of stuff, and then there's a story. So if you could think of those kind of three pillars of adventure gaming, and when you really break it down of like, okay, which one should I get and everything, you should probably think in terms of, okay, what do I want out of my heroes? What do I want out of my board state and combat? And what do I want out of my story? We're reflecting on the hero system, right? And we talked about Final Fantasy Tactics, and I haven't played the game in 20 years. It's been a very, very long time. But what I do remember is being able to tailor my my team depending on what the fight needed. So I have 12 classes available to me, one of which was that stupid calculator, which is so overpowered. And assuming you didn't just take calculators, like 7 of them, into the fight, and you actually cared, you can really tailor the shape of the spells and the distance that people move and whether they're fly and whether, like, is that the feeling that you wanted to bring to Adventure Tactics?
Absolutely, because you unlock, I love cards, so there's an element of deck building. Like, you gain the cards as you level up, and you get cards from your new class, or whatever you leveled up in. But you also unlock passive abilities and dice abilities, which affect, things that you can do. Like, one character can change their order in the initiative based off of passive. Dice abilities affect how you roll or make others roll, so you can re-roll dice or add extra dice, that kind of thing. So you have a set of 5 of those. And like the passives in Final Fantasy Tactics, like you acquire those and you can mix and match the best ones. And yeah, you can change them out in between fights. So if you think one's going to be more useful for the next fight, then you can do that too.
Mm-hmm. Why dice?
I like dice. I think dice rolling is fun. But I also wanted to represent kind of the accuracy system that you find in a lot of those tactical games. Like you have like an 85% hit chance, right? That's your base hit. But missing is not fun in a multiplayer game. Like not doing anything on your turn while you get to watch your friends do other things sucks. Like that's fine in a solo game, like a computer game where you're just sitting down and you control everybody. If you miss, okay, no big deal. But in a multiplayer game, that sucks. You're like, okay, well, I guess I'll wait 5-10 minutes for my turn to come around again and try to do something. And we actually have 4 different types of dice, and so they can represent different ranges and different effects. So the white die is like a D3. It's 1 to 3. You have a red die that's very consistent. It's 2 through 5. There's 2 2s, 2 5s. Mm-hmm. There's the swingy die, the opposite, the black die. It's 1 1 2 5 6 6. So it's feast or famine. There's no in between. And then you have like the blue die, which is just like a better die. It's 3 to 5, but there's no 6. So they all have different flavors, and you can use those. I was able to combine those to kind of reflect accuracy, but not so that you're never missing. You're never doing nothing.
And it's funny, like Dan, you mentioned that you're in a Descent league. You do a lot of nothing in Descent because of this. It feels like there's for as many lightning bolts and numbers as there are on the dice, there's that many shields. So everything just kind of cancels out. From what I saw in the demo, you guys posted a demo video. I think you had some friends. I noticed that it was just like a roll and you did that much damage, right?
Yep. Yeah. And so like you said too, with Descent, there's also the miss side of a die too. So not only can they completely defend what you do, but you could just roll and miss. And then there's the range distance too. So I get what they're trying to do where you have range, but if you're 5 away and you roll a 4 for your range, again, you miss. So there's so many different ways you could just not hit things that, like you said, it's very unfulfilling with doing that. Whereas ours, you always hit, but it might have varied amounts of hit, but then the bad guys might have a little more hit points versus Descent where they'll have lower hit points, but you miss, or they defend the bulk of it, something like that. Yeah. And so like Nick said, we wanted something where you felt like you were doing something every turn, regardless of how powerful it might have been. At least hitting someone, if someone else can roll a 6 and they have a hit point of 7, even if you hit for 1, you make it attainable for the next player that they could possibly knock that character out. Right. So you always feel like you're doing something.
So why are you in a Descent league?
I'm actually in 2 different Descent groups, and
so we'll ask the question twice.
We like it. We love these, we love the campaign settings and going through the scenarios and following the story, building our characters and going through it. But my wife actually likes Tactics a lot better now. So once we have the final versions of the game and we're done play testing it, we're going to just start playing full campaigns of that. And
there you go. That's the correct answer.
But yeah, I mean, for now we're going through Descent and working on that.
Mm-hmm. So when we were before the call, and we'll move on to those kind of two other pillars in a second. I'm just kind of on here. When I was talking with Dan about what distinguishes this, we were talking a little bit privately on Twitter, and you mentioned Gloomhaven. So Gloomhaven dispenses with the dice, like it has a kind of dice-esque deck mechanism, but all this stuff was in kind of the hand management and like it's kind of has that Mage Knight feel of like there's so much more control than a set of dice or whatever, and it's maybe at the trade-off of feeling a little bit heavy. So compared to kind of the more hand management-y, very heavy systems like those two games on the hero side, where does Adventure Tactics fit?
Yeah, I mean, I like Gloomhaven Descent both quite a bit. Adventure Tactics, I think, right, it is maybe a little more accessible, but there's still hand management. Like, you still have a deck of cards, and you still have action cards. Like, you draw a hand, your normal hand size is 4, and you can play up to 2 actions on your turn. So, I mean, there's still that aspect of it. And there's also, when you're building a character, when you level into that class, those are the type of cards that you're going to add to your deck. So there's still some in there, but you're right. I would say, because we're trying to emphasize a faster sense of pace of play. Because Gloomhaven, right, it is very deep, but you can also have, people take, 15, 20 minutes on their turn, and that didn't feel like Adventure Tactics-y to me.
Yeah, and so there's a lot with Adventure Tactics that you have a lot of that hand management-esque thinking outside of each encounter as well, right? So you're deciding how to level up, right? So I've kind of mentioned this in some other things as well, but we're new with you here. So if you start as a wizard, you can go level 1 cleric, you can go level 1 rogue, you can go level 1 fighter after that, depending on what you want to add to your deck. And then you go level 1 cleric, say you could go level 2 wizard or level 2 cleric. And then you could go, after that, anything you meet the prereqs for, you can just do it. And so you're really deciding how to build your deck and sculpt it from there. And then you also gain loot, you gain armor, accessories, and weapons. But you can put others in your deck, but you can keep one out as an extra option to use during your turn. So you're deciding what weapons and accessories to keep out during a fight that you might, need the most. Same with passive and dice abilities. And you're making a lot of decisions setting up your fight as you are within the fight as well. And then you get in the fight, you draw 4 cards. You have those cards to choose from, as well as all your armor and accessories and your class features, which are distinct for each class you level up through. And so you have a lot of different options that you're building your character and then presenting yourself with during a fight. So then you can take 2 actions on your turn. It's really deciding what, the other players and where you fall in the initiative and how it's going to best, play out during that round. But, during the next round, you might not need the next set of cards, so you discard a couple. And so there's a lot of, processing going on within there, but it's really then you have 4 cards in your hand and you're choosing 2 things to play.
And do you earn that, because that sounds great, but I've seen games that begin too early, so to speak. Like the first couple of missions are real, like, all right, here we go, basic attack, and yay, I got a card. And at the end of it, maybe after the 5th, 6th mission, I'm humming, but the beginning is, flat. So how did you navigate that particular issue?
Dan was actually a real champion of early progression. Because you originally locked the elite classes like Barbarian, Paladin, the cool elite classes. That was originally much later, at least 1 level later. And Dan's like, no, let them get to the cool stuff right away. And also, you level up after every encounter, so you're always progressing. You're always getting something new. And less than half your deck is basic moves and basic attacks. So you have even from choosing your starting class, you should have slightly more than half your deck is going to be original cards that are unique to that character. So you should never feel like a cookie cutter, like carbon copy character, even from the get-go.
Yeah, even if you fail an encounter, thank you. Even if you fail an encounter, you level up. We wanted you to progress. We don't want you to stall within the campaign. We want you to level up, and so what Nick did that was great was if you fail, you level up, but maybe you won't get, so instead of 3 pieces of loot, you might get 2 pieces of loot, or it's a branching campaign. If you won the fight, okay, you have 2 options of how you could proceed, but if you lose, you just go right on to this one direct one. You don't have a say. And so he kind of worked in, okay, yes, you're progressing, but different things are going to happen. And then as you get into the tower, which is the second act, a lot more happens if you, depending on how you do with these fights. And so there's a lot of cool stuff happening, but we wanted you to always feel like you were moving on.
Yeah.
Cool.
And there's also to lead into what Dan said, there's beating the fight, and also there's every fight also has a bonus objective, which is meant to make it tougher, but to give you better rewards too. So one example, so we're not spoiling anything too late, is the first fight is he has a bunch of ads or minions that come with him, and beating him is the basic way to beat that fight. But you will get the bonus objective if you defeat all his minions too.
Yeah.
So and he also summons minions at half health. So you kind of have to weigh whether you're just going to let him follow you around and beat on you while you beat up his minions that just got here, so in order to get the bonus objective. So there are different ways you can challenge yourself too. So that's where a lot of the tactics come in, I think.
So this is a very, very important question. There's the most important question that I'm ever going to ask. This is a Final Fantasy emulator. Do you have a cactus that shows up for a round and then disappears, and you have to get him?
There's no cactus.
No cactus? Oh no!
There's no cactuar. He doesn't he doesn't do like 1,000 needles and disappear.
I will say, and I love. There's another thing Nick did that. There are random encounters, and they're not full-on fights. So a lot of them are there's a deck of random encounters. You draw a card, and it says, okay, this happens. You do this or do that, and that's it, right? You read it off. It adds to the story. But what's cool is if you fail a fight or you don't beat it with the bonus objective. So, for instance, that fight, again, this is the first fight, so we're not spoiling too much. It's called Rigby, and he has all his minions. If you don't beat all his minions to get the bonus, a random encounter card goes in called Rigby's Raiders, and it's basically the minions coming back later because you didn't defeat them in the first time. So the story kind of carries through with you. You didn't defeat them all. They come back. They ransack your kind of caravan type of thing. And it's a quick little thing. You don't actually fight them, but you draw a card, and it tells you this happens.
Yeah.
And so there are cool things that, yes, you beat the fight, you didn't get the bonus, and you leveled up, but the Raiders came back later, and you probably should have beaten them all, and so, and there's a lot of other things like that in the story that, again, it's just to keep you moving forward, but everything you do is going to affect you later, and it's done in a very elegant way.
All right, so let's talk about the second pillar. So I think we've covered pretty thoroughly that hero part, combat, and I want to attack this question in a certain way because I feel like of the three pillars, like hero and the combat and the story, the combat is where a game can feel unfulfilling or fall apart or whatever it is because it's so hard. We're talking about designing AI basically and putting AI into a board game, and that's so easy to mess up for various reasons. I feel like you can have an AI that's too simple. You could have an AI that's too fiddly, and you have to move 7 different things before you even go make your turn again. There's like the overlord player. He's not even, is not the official overlord, but he has to be or she to move all the pieces. Or it's just complicated. Like there's so many ways to kind of mess it up. I guess the question to ask is, how did you approach, what kind of AI did you want to make? And then how did you go about doing it?
So I wanted to be pretty straightforward, but I still wanted to be varied enough so it doesn't feel boring. So it's not just move closest to the closest player and use your basic attack. So one of the design philosophies was to have a bunch of cool boss fights. And that's another reason why we can keep the playtime down, is that it's basically a series of boss fights without the exploration that you find in like the Ascents and Gloomhavens of the world. And that way you can keep the mechanics more interesting too. A lot of times when you encounter enemies in Descent or Gloomhaven, they're pretty basic because it could be like on different parts of the map. It could, there's a lot of different things that could restrict how cool you can make the enemy. But in Tactics, every fight is like a set piece, right? Yes. So we can control that. Like there's a trap master, and his entire map is full of traps. So I could specifically design around that, and that can make it more interesting too. I'm giving one up, but there's the Kraken who dives in between different pools and got like tentacle ads. So. I'm sorry for interrupting you. I thought of Mechs vs. Minions, the way they approached the way they did, and for whatever reason I don't know, they never released new scenarios and they didn't go back to that design, and it was such a cool game. It had such cool set pieces. It was when you said that word, that's like the first thing I thought of. It was like, in that game you had like the lava boss and and the chase where the fireballs were kind of flowing and everything, and not to spoil anything, but if you haven't played it by now, then whatever. Yeah, no, we're in a group. We have an Mechs vs. Minion group too.
yeah. We enjoy that one.
It's very cinematic. And it does a couple of things. One, thematically, it kind of adds every single combat has this kind of like grandeur to it, so to speak. And then you're able to kind of focus a lot of mechanisms on the boss. It isn't just like a bunch of mooks, running around. Like I feel like a lot of Gloomhaven battles are excuses to do hand management as opposed to like real set piece. I don't know if that makes sense,
Right.
but
Yep.
like really like you guys really put a lot of emphasis on making that boss cool.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, yeah. What's neat is what Nick did was, so in the scenario guide, we put like how you set it up, what the boss's active abilities are, and how they act. So it targets closest player, or targets this specific player. But then they have a deck of cards that's every turn, that's what they do. So you flip a card. Nick loves cards, but each boss has about 10 cards. And one of the bosses doesn't have cards. That'll be a fun fight as well. But you flip the top card and it tells you exactly how they act. But what's cool then is, so you might have a fight that's goblins and wraiths, and you flip the card and it says, okay, this is the worst card, but they all move and make basic attacks in this way. But some might be, okay, the wraiths move and make basic attacks, but the goblins just move, or vice versa. Or one might not activate at all. So you know what cards are in the deck, but you don't know which one's coming, even if you've seen a couple before. And not everything's always going to activate, but the bosses are going to activate and attack you in some way on their turn. Most of them might just move and make a basic attack, but then it might be like, okay, they move and use this special ability they have, and that's going to devastate you. Not devastate you, but it's going to do a little more damage or pull the player closer to them, so now it mixes up the fight because now you're trapped right in front of them type of thing. And so they all have these unique ways and they act. Like one has a harpoon, right? And it's kind of like Scorpion in Mortal Kombat with Get Over Here, where he harpoons you, he damages you, and he pulls you right in front of him. So you might have been trying to keep some distance from him, but that's a unique effect that boss has. Right. And like Nick said, he designed around what they do, who they are, and how these bosses act, that they're these beautiful set pieces that interact with you in some way.
And yeah. I was going to say, that also helps tie it into the third pillar, too. When they're all set pieces, all the bosses are part of the narrative, too. It's not just some random guys you encountered like in the back alley. Like you didn't roll. And we got rid of the grinding too. So there are random encounters that kind of replicate that feel of random encounters. So there's a deck of cards, but they're not full on fights. So we're not forcing you to grind out levels. But I still want to have like, okay, something cool happened, something interesting. And sometimes that's affected by what you did in the campaign. But by having those set pieces, you can keep everything story driven or character driven too.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because normally when I do these interviews, stories is the first place I go because I'm like a hugely thematic first gamer. I felt like I wanted to hammer down on this combat piece first because that's where the pit trap is. Like, I love this game, but then I was playing for 5 hours and I don't love this game anymore because of the combat system, like because it's unintuitive or whatever it is. So I don't want to spend too much time with it. I like the idea of the set pieces. The one question I had was, how did you approach that idea that like when you have like a central boss and you pull his card or her card, it can feel very kind of flowcharty in the sense of like, okay, if the boss is here, do this, and if the boss is here, then step forward 3 places, and if there's 4 mooks on the board, then they do this, and like like I remember seeing the video, and it was pretty long, like it was a pretty kind of long, detailed thing. I mean, did that feel like how did you kind of feel about that? Did you wish that you could kind of shorten that up, or is it a good space, or what do you think?
Well, we had to kind of compromise between what was interesting and what was playable, right? Because we talked about earlier, if all they do is always moves to the closest player and makes an attack, right? It's basic attack. That's not that interesting, right? So I try to balance within the cards. Sometimes that's what's going to happen. Boss moves makes it an attack, right? But then they also have special abilities. Like one boss will drop firewalls and stone walls that are damaging hazards, like our obstacles on the map, right? So it's a balance. You don't want to fill all the cards that way, so that, as you said, it's not a flowchart. You don't have to manage every single card that way. But so you have to find that right mix between the cards. And I tried to do that as best as possible. A lot of times though, that came out through playtesting. One fight, the Blob King. We probably playtested that. Like,
I love
Dan
great fight.
I think the fight's in a great place now.
But we're on Skype. Dan just made the most awesome eye roll and sigh. It's like,
well, I remember the going through the Blob King, and
that first night, I think we played it like 8 times.
And it was just like, but we would stop it after 5 minutes and be like, this is already not working. Like, and it just took a very long time to find like you said, that sweet spot of, does this fight work? But I think another thing Nick did, at least the very first fight, is very simple and straightforward. And that was on purpose, because that whole fight, the point is to learn how to do it. And as you learn to run the boss, those things that you mentioned actually become almost very intuitive once you've played the game a little bit. So that's why, like, the first two fights, there's not that many special abilities. There aren't any tricky things really that the bosses do, yet, because you're just learning, okay, this is a simple board and this is what I'm doing. And you're like, and like actually one person even reviewed it because they only got to play that and they were like, oh, the intro was a little easy. And it's like, well, yeah, that's the intro. You're learning the game. But like one fight in, once you get to one of the second fights there, just a lot more starts happening. It gets a lot harder and, things start happening. But you've played it once and you get how they act and what you're doing, so that then you start learning these little nuances that are the bosses are doing on their turns instead.
Okay, I actually I don't want to spend too much time on this, but is the first fight, did you get feedback that it might be too simple? Like I struggle with games that are like too simple, like they kind of almost like dumb down, where they're treating me like a child. It's like, okay, here, hold my hand, and here's a basic attack, and here's this. And I hope that, okay, actually, I shouldn't say I hope, but like in terms of, did you get that feedback? Are you nervous about that? Like, how did you approach that first fight being too simple?
Some people have mentioned that, but these are also the people, like, they've played all these tactics games. Like, they're very familiar with the genre. But we can't assume that everyone's going to have played this type of game before. Yeah. And that's usually where that kind of feedback came from. But also, I think that's where the bonus objectives help out a lot, too. Yeah. Where, okay, you want some more challenge? Okay, now do it. Now you have to win the fight under these extra conditions, too. And we also have little skull warnings. So a lot of times when there's a branch, one of the branches may be harder than the others, and that will have a little skull by it. So if you want to chase that challenge, we absolutely will allow you to do so.
And just to break into, can we start segueing the story, because this kind of
relates
to that question too?
Let's do it. Yes.
So the book starts with, so these are 5 different characters, and they actually aren't together as a party yet, and it gives you their quick backstory, right? So the archer is chasing these goblin raiders that raided her camp, and finds them attacking a village, and in that village there's the fighter, she's the on patrol, and the rogue is in jail nursing a hangover, and the wizard is like doing his morning readings, right, studying, and the cleric is at in doing her morning prayer, and there's a blurb about what each one is doing, but these goblins attack the front gate, and it's a 2-pronged attack where they're coming to the back of the village as well. And so at the very beginning of the story, you're presented right away with an option. So if you don't want the intro scenario to be the intro scenario, there's a skull warning with the second option as well. They're both great fights, actually, and they both have some cool rewards. And again, as Nick said, the bonus objective can really propel it into what might have been an easy fight isn't anymore, because you're now going for the harder objective. But
so even off from the jump, even for like the very first scenario, you have a little skull option to give a little meat on the bone for more experienced gamers.
Yes. And so right off the bat, you have a 2-pronged attack on this village, and that starts the narrative, and actually what they're there to do carries throughout as part of the story that leads through the whole campaign.
Yep. And even beyond the bonus objectives, the resurrection or revive potions, that serves as like your party's life. Like you can always pop back up after you get down, but you have a limited number of those potions. And we have different difficulty levels. Like 2 is the standard for party of 3. But if you can add or subtract 1 to make the game easier or harder too.
Oh, come on, man! Phoenix down.
Yeah, there's obviously copyright issues, but like revive potions is what we termed it in tactics.
Yeah.
And so the story is, I guess, whimsical. Like the art is whimsical. It's very evocative of the Legend of Zeldas and everything, cartoony. I wouldn't say like an anime style, but definitely in that kind of, but definitely more towards that than like a Madara, which is a little bit more,
right.
Or
not like grimdark art, yeah.
Yeah, or Folklore of the Affliction, like, these kind of more grim, darker tales. Like, so maybe talk a little bit about how all the lore pieces came together and how it kind of propels some of the gameplay.
So it's funny, when we started, we didn't have a big story, and we were playing with Ian, Ian Zhang. He works for Deepwater and Deepwater Games, and he's done Constellations and Curio for WizKids. He was over my house, and we played it with Nick, and he was like, I love the game, but you need a story. You got to connect this. Yeah. And we're like, okay. And Nick came up with a really good story. And it starts and there's this I don't want to spoil any of it, but there's something that it carries you through. You see why you have to go after this queen. The whole first act one is the first half of the thing is getting to her tower. So you're traveling to the main city and then you're trying to track down clues and fighting all these bad people. Then you get to the tower and the whole second act is going through the tower, but the story still carries through. The way fights happen affect, there's 5 different endings. And right, is it 5, Nick, that we ended up with? Yes. Yeah. And there's 5 different endings depending on how you did and how the story plays out, but different things you're doing are going to affect that. And so there's just this one story that starts with you at the beginning and carries all the way through. And as I said, even little things like not beating the boss's minions is just going to pop up in the story and say, okay, they raided you. And like, it's not like carrying through, but there's the meta story, but then there's these little, mini stories going out throughout it that continue the narrative.
Yeah. Okay. So like cascading effects, boss keys was the concept that ENGN was really pushing for. Like as you keep mentioning Zelda, Jason, like that was an inspiration for the kind of story too. But also in Zelda, you could kind of all over the place, like Metroid, Castlevania, that kind of style too. Like getting one thing allows you to unlock something later. So we kind of built that into a lot of the campaign things too. So if you beat a boss in a certain way, that might help you down the line. Like you might get a plot item, or you might even get accessory or a charm that helps you with a fight later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, do you have the key? If so, progress this way. If not, you got to do this one.
Well, I mean, the way Legend of Zelda did it is like you could just, if you have the raft, you just walk.
You could just go straight. Yeah, you could just
do it. Exactly. So you built a lot of that stuff in. That sounds really awesome.
Yep, and even some you get as for winning a fight, but other items they'll show up in the market later if you never get them in the fight. So then you could purchase them.
Oh, you have that random market guy that just appears in the middle of the dungeon. It's like, what are you doing in there?
He doesn't appear in the dungeon. He shows up as a wandering encounter when you're traveling or in the city. So, but I was very. But there is one. She's encountered at a very specific juncture. Yeah. There is a merchant in the wizard's tower. Yeah. But you need that break, right? To be like, okay, I'm going to sell my stuff. I'm going to buy some new stuff. So
it's funny because like I was just playing. This is a little while ago, but the first Dragon Age, I think, had like this. It was like a kid or something like that, or like it was like an adult, but it has a mentality of a kid or something like that, and it just shows up at the last dungeon. I just finished wading through like 17 dragons, and the world is falling out, and there's this merchant. Are you kidding me? You're not even trying.
He's actually sounded like a body of like Darkspawn or all that around him.
They had to justify it somehow.
Yeah. So what's cool though is then too, in the earlier fights where you didn't get the bonus, and so there's sometimes an option of 4 different loot you could get, and you get 1 or 2 of them. The remaining loot all go in the market as well. So as you get there later, the ones you didn't get, you can choose to buy them because you're going to get gold if you beat fights. But you got to decide how you want to spend it, what items you want to do. There'll be some healing potions, some story-driven items, all kind of mixed in there, and you could sell your armor back into it and stuff like that.
All right, so I think that we have enough of a sense of what we're getting into. I mean, there's whimsy, there's a lot of intentionality put into the combat, the set piece kind of approach to it, as opposed to kind of this more grindy approach. So much stuff that you're talking about. Like, I guess my last question is, like, going back to the whole idea of there's so many projects out there. Are you guys nervous that you won't be able to kind of penetrate the wall of all these different projects, ether fields and everything? Do you feel confident that this game will be able, I know you're very confident in the game itself, but do you feel like you can navigate those waters and really expose people to what the heart of what this game is?
Yeah, like you said, with the way Kickstarter is now, it's just never a sure thing. Even good projects, if they stall or something goes wrong the first day, it's always scary when you hit that launch button. You're always just that first day, because that first day you can gauge where it's going, right? And you're always scared how that first day is going to gauge out. But I feel like between the art and the response we've getting from people who've actually played it, I know we have a decent community coming that first day to bring it. And I think, it's hard to gauge how successful it's going to be, but I think, I'm pretty confident going into it that we're going to fund. It's not like we won't fund, but you never know,
Sure.
right? With Kickstarter, you could have something that, does really well the first day, flatlines, and doesn't take off. But we're putting in a lot of work to expose people to this, to do these interviews, to get things out there. We're doing demos at all, at cons, every con we can get to, and just making sure people know about it and hear about it, so that, if it's the game for them, they'll see it, they'll know about it, and they can come back it. And hopefully, I think we've worked really hard on this, so hopefully that, comes through when we launch.
How you feeling about it, Nick?
I mean,
This is your biggest, fattest game to date.
Yeah. I mean, I'm nervous for all those reasons that you mentioned. And right, it's such a huge project. I feel that if people understand, like, I mean, every board game has love and care put into it, and passion, obviously. But I think if people get, like, if they were Final Fantasy Tactics fan, if they're Disgaea fans, like, if you love that kind of class system and you see Adventure Tactics, I think, you're going to appreciate it. So but you're right. The challenge is to get it out there and that people understand, like, this is the game that really is trying to replicate that kind of feel, that kind of system.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I really hope that this podcast helps out the project. It sounds really, really interesting. I'm definitely going to keep in touch with it. Is there anything else that we need to know? I mean, contact information, how we can have access to the game. I know there's a Kickstarter project, but what cons you're going to show up at? How can people reach out to you? All that good stuff.
Yep. So we have Cassie Friedman is going to be demoing the game at Gen Con, and there's a chance Nick or I are both maybe also trying to get there for a day as well, but it will be available for demo at Gen Con. We are going to be doing a lot of local demos. We're doing a couple local demos at one of our local game stores, and then at our other local game store, we're having a launch party on the second day after it launches. And we're going to be running demos there all night. And so anyone, local can do a lot of that. At this point, I think a lot of the major cons, we demoed it at Dice Tower Con and at Origins, but those have since passed. So really, the Gen Con's the big one coming up. Mm-hmm. But then, it's on Tabletop Simulator. We're happy to play it with anyone who's interested in playing it.
Oh, cool.
Yep. And
that just came out.
Yep, just came out, and all of the rule books and documents are out there if anyone wants to peruse through it. Because I think that's, like Nick said, conveying what's in there. I mean, even on the campaign page, you can't convey, like, how the random encounters are there, or even the market, right? We don't really mention that there's a wandering market that pops up. But these are cool features that, like, if people dive into the rule book and the storybook and see it, like, those are things that'll come through that are really, I think, would draw me into a game like this. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, they're free to ask us any questions. We're both very active online. I'm at Letterman Games, Letiman Games on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And the Tactics campaign page is at tinyurl.com/adventure tactics. And so anyone who wants to check everything out, all the stuff's on the game page, all the information, they can reach out to me or Nick. Nick can give his information as well.
Yeah. No, I always joke about this because I choose a really, like, unfriendly Twitter handle, but it's at YUTINGXIANG. But I tell everybody the easiest way to find me is through Dan. Like, I'm always, like, liking and responding to his comments and posts.
Sure.
And Dan usually shouts me out whenever he links Tactics too, so that's nice.
Yeah. That was Adventure Tactics, Domianne's Tower. This is Dan Letzring and Nicholas Yu. Good luck with the project, gentlemen.
Thank you so much.